All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with the lesson. So today we're on Unit 19, Session 5. It's about Jesus at the temple. I'm sure most, if not all of us, are familiar with this story, with this, with this time in his life. Obviously, I can't really make any jokes about my mom abandoning me for 3 days because she is on here, but I will tell you that rarely happened. But so here we are. We're going to be largely in Luke 2, and I think we're going to spend, just as I was kind of going through this, I think we're going to spend most of our time on point 1, but we'll just kind of see how the conversation takes us, right? But I guess, if you just look at this list right here, the Bible doesn't give us a ton about Jesus in his youth, right? But as we talked about yesterday, last week, the Bible gives us a sufficient amount of detail. It gives us what we need. It doesn't answer our every question. At the level of detail that we would be interested in, but what we see, cements, what we need to know about Jesus and his life and his ministry and his family, and in this case, his family's traditions. And so, if we just kind of look at this flow, his conception, his, from a baby born to a toddler, to a young boy, to a young man, to a man on mission. You could certainly argue, that even by this lesson, we see he was a boy on mission too, right? And that, there was a lot of, this duality between, being fully man and fully God. But we see in this moment, through the scriptures that we're going to read today, that he had an inkling or an idea or a full understanding about his mission on earth and whose he was, not just who he was, but whose he was. So, we'll kind of talk about that. So just when you think of the term, it says he grew in wisdom and stature, and that's actually a lead into to the next verse. But when we talk about Jesus growing in wisdom and stature, what does that look like to you in human terms when somebody says, he's growing in wisdom and stature?
Well, from a developmentalist perspective, we talk about growth and development, and a lot of times people equate those words the same. But when we use the word growth, we mean changes in physical height and weight and those kinds of changes, whereas development is all those other facets of your life, your spiritual development, your intellectual development, and those kinds of things. So I think what they're saying is here he grew in all ways. He grew physically up as well as intellectually, emotionally, socially, and spiritually.
Anything else?
Well, I sort of wonder, obviously his mother knew that he could perform miracles, but was he doing that as a kid? People bring a frog that had gotten hurt and he'd heal it, just interesting thoughts of how his deity interacted with his humanity.
Right. There's a point here that when they talk about, and I think there is a lot of commentary, right? We wonder, right? And some of our wonderings are more educated and some are more speculative, right? But there's certainly a lot of questions that we have. And, one of the things that people talk about is just what is, what was it like being a mother and a father of Jesus growing up and interacting with him. Well, what I would tell you is I think most of what we see is most of the people around them, to include his parents in some ways, may lose the bubble on who he really is and how important he is. Now, I mean, Mary certainly knew
Thank you, won't matter.
in her, you know, before he was born, you know, she was approached by the angel. But what I would say is, even in this, you know, he reminds her, you know, how he's his father's son, right, and how he had to be in his father's house. So let's go ahead and go to the first verse. And Scott, if you'd go ahead and read that for me, or all of us.
And the child grew and became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. And when the feast was ended, as they were returning, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it, but supposing him to be in the group, they went a day's journey. But when they began to search for him among their relatives and acquaintances, and when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem searching for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers.
Right. I have a lot to say on this, but you know, if you don't want me to, that means you need to talk. So, you know, what are your guys' thoughts on, you know, when you read this, what stands out to you in these verses? What are your thoughts? Let me scroll down to get to this first question. Okay.
Now it's on me.
All right. What are your thoughts on this?
I thought it was interesting that he was asking them questions, but it said they were amazed at his understanding and his answers.
Right. So on that for a second, and I led a Sunday night class that we were talking about just the way that rabbis interacted with you know, their students. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's hard for me to know. This is another speculation. This is more of a rhetorical question, but all of us are probably familiar with you know, people who have been mentors or teachers in our lives that when they were teaching us, you know, we might find ourselves asking them questions, and one of the ways that they would answer us back is with a question, right? So you have that, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I don't know if this is who Jesus is now in this story. Later, certainly, when he's teaching in the temple, you know, they talk about how, you know, how he's teaching and that he's asking questions, and how you'd almost have a conversation of questions, right? Where you ask a question, and by the way, I don't know if you've ever dealt with Wayne this way, but Wayne will do this to you, right? Where you ask him a question and then he turns it around on you, and all of a sudden you're like, look, man, I just, you know, but I would say that I don't know if that's who Jesus was in this moment, or in this moment, if it's just, you can also tell just by the quality of a question that somebody asks, you know, their comprehension, you know, are they on the right path? Are they getting it? So I kind of tend to think it's a little of both, right? That they could just see, you know, who Jesus was in this, to say, man, he's really getting it. You know, he's really understanding. And so I think that's a great point. And something that we should think about is that this, you know, that's where he was, and that's who he was at this moment. Anything else?
Well, I had a question then.
Okay.
Is 12 years old, is that something significant? Being 12? Would that mean anything during that time? The fact that he was 12 years old, is that something significant or not?
Yeah, no, I mean, he's still considered a child, right? I mean, I would say his transition to manhood hasn't happened yet, you know, so I think, you know, they'd be showing us. I hadn't thought of this, but I would just say, for the most part, I think we're really focused here on more of time in Jesus's life of the Feast of the Passover, right? And more about where we are in in the life of the, you know, Jewish people, not so much where he was. Anyone else? So last week we talked about Simeon and how we didn't know a lot about Simeon, but that his you know, a couple of words that were used to describe him were righteous and devout, right? And how we could learn about Simeon just from, look, we don't know a lot about this guy, but what we do know is that he was righteous and devout. So if you look back at this top line, verse 40, you know, Jesus at this moment, you know, there's 4 statements they make just in verse 40, right? Where it says, and the child grew, he became strong, filled with wisdom, and the favor of God was upon him, right? I mean, again, not to make too many jokes about me as a child because my mom's here, but I will tell you, those are probably not the 4 words that anyone other than my mom would have used to describe me. Now, she thought pretty highly of me, but I would say that, you know, look, there's a lot going on, you know, in Jesus's life in this moment. Factor that on top of the fact that, you know, they're taking this big, long journey to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. So let me just stop there for a second. What does it tell you? And we talked about this last week, in the last couple of weeks, actually more around the time that he was born. What does this tell you about them traveling? What does it tell you about him and his family that they were traveling to the Feast of the Passover?
They were devout people who believed in God and were, you know, so much so that they would travel for days, I guess, to celebrate this feast.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, and again, it says something about the household that Jesus was raised in, right? And not just the household, but, you know, he's surrounded by, you know, family and friends here, right? The caravan of people, and that they would make this journey, you know, and I think we just need to remember this, that you know, this was who his life was centered around, right? It was centered around God, and that he was learning these things. Okay, hold on a second. I'm having some technical difficulties. Got it, fixed it. Okay, so now let's look at this next question. Why is it important to keep in mind that he's fully human as we are? Why is it important that we continue to remind ourselves that Jesus was going through these things as a child? Anyone?
Well, Randy, I think Scott, I think that, you know, is important because, you know, that kind of lets us know that he can relate, you know, to the problems and troubles that we go through as humans. You know, if had he not been, you know, fully human, had he only just been fully God, then we might have felt that he couldn't relate to our situation.
Right, that he was temptable, right? That he was, you know, dealing with things, that he was going through puberty, that he was, you know, I mean, that he had wants and desires, and, you know, and just that he was, and the other way of twisting this, not twisting, but the other way of looking at this is that he, as this book says, he's a fit substitute, right? That he was human, that he was able to pay for humanity because he was the perfect human, right? All right, let's go. Let's kind of scroll ahead here. Now, here's where they're talking about his faithfulness, their faithfulness of traveling. What are some ways? And I mean, by the way, here's a perfect opportunity for Sunday school answers. But how can we grow in wisdom concerning the things of God? I mean, just what are ways that work for you of how you can grow in your wisdom?
Randy, I think prayer is a biggie and can help us grow also and learn more about Jesus and God.
Morley, listen, I'm going to use you as an example in this, okay? Since you spoke up, that's always that's how you get volunteered for something, okay? But actually, I'm going to volunteer your wife here for a second. You know, a lot of times when we have adversity, that's really where your character is revealed, right? You know, and what I'll tell you is, you know, I've seen a couple of funny things this week. I'll say, of course, you know, I look on, you know, social media and that sort of thing, and I see things, and one of the things that I saw where it says, you know, for the last 6 months, if you'd have looked at Facebook or anything like that, you'd see things like, would you live in this house? You know, and they'd show a picture of a cabin. Would you live in this house for 3 months with no technology for $1 million? And everybody's like, oh yeah, sign me up, sign me up. You know, I can't wait to do that. And yet here we are, you know, in a 2-week quarantine, and people are just like, I got to run out for, you know, thank you cards for Christmas, you know, and they're just finding every excuse to get out of the house. And that, you know, some of the things that we say we are aren't really who we are. And I saw another one. I don't know if I can word this correctly, but I thought it was really funny. Is like all those times that I said, man, if I just had more time, I would clean this house. And it turns out time wasn't the problem. And so what I'll say is when you're put to the hazard, so to speak, your character is really revealed. And one of the things when Morley and Diane were in the hospital a few weeks back and in the rehab facility for, I mean, really, I don't know how, Morley, how long, was that 5-6 weeks? How long were you guys in there?
I'll defer that to Diane.
I was in the hospital a week altogether and rehab 3 weeks.
Yeah. And I bet it felt like 20, right? But again, I told you guys this, but when I came there and there was an issue with how people could get up to see her and how people could get up and visit. She was far away. And she said, listen, I'm not alone. And then she put her hand on her Bible. That's the answer to this question, right? I mean, that you know, what do you turn to? You know, how are the ways that you can grow in your wisdom concerning the things of God? Walk with him, talk with him, pray, read, listen. Now, you know, how are we spending our time? Are we spending our time trying to get to know him, or are we spending our time doing other things? You know, so clearly I would say you see examples like this, and Morley and Diane, you guys have been an example to me. So I've seen that just through your lives, and to many others in this class. You guys have been great examples to Beth and I. So I thank you for that.
So Randy, one other thing I think is interesting.
Yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Yeah, and where it says that God's grace was upon him, and that word grace is the same word, charis. It's the same word that's used for the gifts. So it's like God, like you're saying, it's us getting closer and closer to the Lord, because then we're receiving from him. We're receiving his grace. We're receiving his gifts. We're receiving his wisdom. It's not our wisdom that we're growing in. It's his, you know, and I just think it's really remarkable that word is that God's grace was on Jesus, and he offers that to us also. Right.
And Lori, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I don't know that I would have got to it. You know, that's a gift of grace, right? That is offered to all of us. And I think if you're not living in it, and, you know, we've all experienced God's grace, whether we, you know, and I mean that, you know, I mean, we've all of us experienced God's grace. Not everybody understands that or recognizes that. But, you know, I think about it when, you know, one of the things that's attractive about, let's say, you know, one of the movies I like at Christmas time is Scrooged. And there's at the end of the movie, you know, when Bill Murray's having his, you know, aha moment, and he's like, you know, when you see this hope and when you see this love and this passion that surrounds this time, you crave more of it, and you just want more of it. And he does a better job saying that, but it was scripted. But I'll just tell you that I think that's what it is that when we when we get our wants and desires out of the way, or I should say when our wants and desires are more aligned with his will, you start to see what his gifts look like and his grace looks like in our lives, and you crave more of that. And then it just becomes this cycle of, wanting more of that and growing closer to him. All right, let's move on here to point 2. Scott, if you'd read that. And so this is we kind of glossed over the fact that he was gone away from his family for a day, and that was just the caravan, right? They were walking in a community, and the parents were like, "Oh, Jesus is around here somewhere," and then there was just, they looked for him, and then by the time they had to backtrack and go to where they were, and then ultimately they found him, and they found him in the temple. And so this is that interaction.
And when his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Son, why have you treated us so? Behold, your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And he said to them, "Why are you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" And they did not understand, and saying that, he spoke to them.
Okay. So there's a central point here, and then there's a lot of other side things that we would think about in this verse. What is it that you guys, you've obviously heard this a bunch of times, so what stands out to you when you hear this particular verse talked about?
Well, the thing that kind of stuck out to me was, even though when Mary, was pregnant, the angel had told her, "Hey, you're going to be having this child that's the Son of God." Here we are 12 years later. It seems like maybe she kind of, maybe doesn't remember some of that stuff as maybe as sharply as she would have, when it first happened. So, because she's kind of been involved in the daily life of raising the child and maintaining the family and everything.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Mary and Martha story, right? That she's been about the task of just doing the day-to-day tasks and the chores, and not understanding really the gift that she has and whose that gift is, right?
Well, I think it brings out his humanity also, that she's treating him as her son. As she was talking to him, "I'm your mom. Why'd you do this?" So it made him seem more human at that time also.
Right. And so it's not one of the questions in here, but it's a question that just comes about every time. Now, "Son, why have you treated us so?" Right, she says. And then he answers, and then we're going to get into more of that answer in the next verse. But was he being disrespectful to her, do you think, in this whole situation?
No.
No, I don't think so.
Well, some think that he was, but you're right, he wasn't, I don't think, right? So clearly, you think about, the verses that were given, honor your mother and father and that sort of thing. But what about his answer here of why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house, or about my father's business, as Scott said? But
yeah, I was lapsing into the King James there for
I got
a second.
you, Scott. Listen, I'm right there with you. But that certainly has a much deeper meaning, given that he knows who his earthly father is, right? But what is he saying? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?
It's like he's questioning their faith. That's what I'm thinking. That's what I see.
Okay, yeah. I mean, there's the look, this is all that I'm about, right? Like, I am about this house, and I'm about, my father, and you don't have to worry, don't worry about me. I'm going to be fine, right? Now so I get that side of it. Well,
you were just talking about all the questioning. He was questioning the Pharisees. Well, now he's questioning his parents too, putting it to him. Well, didn't you know? It's kind of like digging, making them think.
Yeah, like where else would I be?
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking, you know, that he's when you are a scholar, when you do desire to learn more, you have such passion for that and you want to be there. And that's what he's saying is, well, why were you looking for me under the rocks and in the video arcade? You know, didn't you know I would be here? This is where I would be. And so
Right.
that's what he's saying.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, no, I think that's the perfect answer. And so let me just scroll down here for a second.
You know, he also had earthly brothers and sisters. So when it's talking about his family, you can see that broader perspective too. That his parents had probably said, "Hey, you know, Simon, where's your brother? You know, Jude, where's Jesus? What is he up to?" So there were a lot of more people involved, and we don't often think about his brothers and sisters, but he did have siblings.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Ivy, and so to bring that out and kind of go back to one of the things that Scott said earlier, if you look at this, you know, the two highlighted words here, I don't know how clearly it is to you here, but they're talking about Jesus's identity, right? And so he's saying, I identify with my Father in heaven, right? And that in doing so, I have a mission to do his work, right? And so, and I don't do a great job sometimes highlighting the names of these points, but point one was Jesus demonstrated his wisdom in God's law, and then this one is Jesus prioritized his Father's work. And so when we're talking about the prioritizing their Father's work, this is how he was preparing to go to work, right? He was, and it says, you know, his mission was to do the will of his Father, and he knew that, you know, at this age. And Mary and Joseph, and I think this was what Scott was bringing up, Mary and Joseph needed to be reminded of that you are really you're a shepherd at this point, you know, and we all are as parents, right? But they're saying, look, you've got me for a little while, but I ultimately am serving my Father. It says, this incident in the temple provided a needed reminder of Jesus's identity to his earthly parents. It also clarified the focus of his mission. His priority was obedience to his heavenly Father. And so when we talk about priorities, and I think this is another, question that is, offers a lot of Sunday school answers, but how do we need to prioritize the mission of God in our lives? What are some ways that we can go about doing that?
Reading the Bible.
I like it. That's never going to be a bad answer in this class. You get extra points for that. You're going to be all right with it. How about just asking, right? I mean, have you ever, and we kind of joke about this from time to time, but I've learned a lot of lessons, over my life, a lot of times through mistakes, right? But my brother-in-law, I've taught you, he's a pastor. Bev, he's the one I was telling you about in Ohio and Kent.
Yeah, right.
But, I think I've mentioned this to you guys before, but there's a subtle difference between asking somebody, hey, do you need anything? Or a subtle difference between saying, hey, let me know if you need anything, versus saying, how can I help you right now, right? There's a subtle difference. It's about the same number of words, right? But one basically is just kind of meant to not get a response. Hey, let me know. Just give me a call if you need anything. No one's ever going to make that call, right? But the other thing is, what can I do for you right now? And what I would tell you is, simply asking, praying, Lord, open my eyes to the need around me. Lord, what are some specific ways that I can help people right now, right? Versus, hey, Lord, just kind of steer me in the right direction. Lord, kind of guide my feet. I find myself, at different stages asking either of those. But I think praying for his wisdom, Lord, what is my mission right now? Lord, put me in the right position, seeking that, right? And I think that there's and by the way, again, as I said in the beginning, for some of you guys that came on a little late, you guys have done a great job of that, in my opinion. You know, many of you have reached out to me and have said, how can I help? And I think that's what we should be looking at. And in this time, again, I talk about this before, people are scared right now, right? And you know, I've had moments. I think our governor has done a great job, but I'll tell you, I was listening to him the other day, and I found myself like, he was trying to scare anybody, but he was saying some pretty scary things, you know. And he had a candid conversation with some radio talk show guys the other day, and he was like, listen, I want to tell you such good news, but I don't know. We're in the middle of this. We might not even be in the middle of this yet. You know, I don't know where this is going to go, you know, but I would tell you that, so people are scared because they just don't know, and we fear the unknown, right? And what I would tell you is, what better time to talk to somebody about the eternal hope of Jesus Christ than when somebody's scared? You know, I will tell you, I've said this 1,000 times, at a wedding, everyone's happy, and the gospel is shared at a wedding. At a funeral, people's ears are open to the gospel, right? It's just people right now, I think, are open to hearing about hope in a way that they might not be if everything's going great in their lives. So look for those opportunities just to pour calm into their lives, and to know that I saw a friend of mine on Facebook just this morning. They ordered Papa John's pizza or Domino's or some other pizza place, and the guy wrote on the box, everything's going to be okay. You know, I mean, of course it is. You got pizza, but bigger. We have a bigger everything's going to be okay, and we should share that with people. So let's go ahead and finish with point 3 here.
Yep. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man.
All right. So here we kind of do see, you know, the official answer to that question, that, you know, Jesus knew who his earthly mother and father was, and he didn't, you know, fight them to stay in the temple. I mean, he went with them, right? What do you, just kind of share what your thoughts are as a class with and his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. What are we talking about here?
Maybe the fact that he came back with them, and he was submissive to them at that point, that she knew that maybe this is temporary.
Yeah, I mean, my goodness, it is that, I mean, that sort of thing about, you know, it won't be like this for long, right? When you have those moments, your kids are growing up, and you look back at those, you know, Facebook memories 5 years ago, and you see how much your kid has grown or whatever. Yeah, so there is probably a temporal nature that she was thinking about. Man, I'm just so glad to have him home. But I think also just the side of him putting in her, just reminding her, as we talked about, you know, all our kids are treasures from God, and there's no doubt. But she had, you know, God's one true son with her, and I think that you know, to be overwhelmed with the fact that, you know, she was given that responsibility, and just to see the man and, you know, the boy that Jesus was and the man that he was becoming, right? And I think there's really an element of awe in that, but also just she had time to celebrate, right? Room to celebrate. What about the last 5 words here? In favor with God and man. What do you take from that?
This is Amy. I get it is that he wasn't a troubled teenager or preteen. He listen and do. And think about it that, Jesus, he's God and he's man and he was growing up. And even though his parents weren't perfect parents, but he decided to listen to his God the Father and submit to his earthly parents. So that is amazing, actually.
Yeah, I love that, Amy. And I think that that's the balance. I was trying to capture what we talked about this last week, but I was trying to capture, and bring that in. But a better Sunday school teacher would be able to remember. But what I would say is, that's that balance that he walked his whole life, right? Is that he was in perfect step with God the Father, his Father, but he was also in perfect step with man, right? Man didn't always agree, and it does talk about this, kind of going back to point one. It does talk about how the people in this stage of Jesus' life were amazed at his learning and his wisdom, but the next time we see him, talking to the leaders in the temple, they're frustrated with him, right? Is that, I think at this point, there is an element of him, just being this, wonderment, like, look at how advanced this guy is. But then later there's a frustration, a challenge, if you will, that he's, when you're up against somebody that they see as just, hey, I'm supposed to be the leader of this, temple, or the leader of this group. And here comes Jesus and he's saying things differently than I've been teaching him. And he's right, and there's just a hardness of their heart. But in this moment, this is really just a win-win for everybody, that he's submissive to his father, but he's submissive to his earthly mother and father too. And I gotta believe that was a daily balance that Jesus had to have. And it's one that we need to walk to. And I want to wrap up with this question, and then we'll close in prayer, of what are ways that we have to kind of do that walk. You see this question, what areas of your life are you encouraged to obey the Lord because of the Son of God's perfect obedience to his sinful earthly parents? What are ways that where are areas of your life where you can have this balance too, where we know our ultimate allegiance is to God the Father, but there are other areas of our life where maybe we need to have allegiances, and the people that we are serving are not perfect.
Well, I guess people working at their jobs, would you say your boss would be one that you need to obey your boss, though they may not be making good decisions?
Yeah, and what does that do for us, right? So, like, the Army has this term, lawful order, right? And real quick story, I'll tell you, theoretically, everybody that outranks you in the Army is your boss, right? That's the way we're taught. I'm an E3, every E4 in the Army outranks me. It doesn't really work that way, but that's the truth, right? And so I had a guy say to me one time that, and of course you're not necessarily called to follow an unlawful order, but if it's a lawful order, you're called to follow it. And so one time we came up to one of our bosses and said, hey, we didn't like this guy was, we don't work for him directly. He was calling us and asking us to do something that I didn't think that you would want us to do. And so we kind of came up and really complained about that. And so my boss at the time said this to me, and I remember it, as long as my memory lasts. He's like, listen, if another sergeant comes up to you and asks you to do something that you don't think I would have you do, I want you to tell me about it. It's like, if another sergeant tells you to go walk through this pit of mud up to your chest, by all means, I want you to come and tell me about it. But when you do, you need to have mud up to your chest. I think that there's just an element of, you can buy favor with people by, obeying them, even if, you don't, if you don't agree exactly with everything, as long as what they're telling you to do is lawful, right? You really do gain more, I think, clout and acceptance and understanding from them if you're not a person that's nitpicking their every move, if you are if you have a servant's heart. And I think that this is an opportunity that Jesus showed us, where he walked in step with both man and God his whole life and struck that balance. Part of that is we need to know God's will for our life. We need to know what perfection looks like. So that goes back to the earlier questions. But even in that, and you need to know what wrong looks like too, so that you don't walk out of step. But I would say those are some areas. So in this moment in our life, as we wrap up, what we should be taking from this is, we are here for a short time. We have been granted hope in eternity, not for us, but for the things that he has done for us. But our mission, while we may have individual daily missions to do certain things, our larger mission is to help other people walk in step with God. And our best way of doing that is by showing them what that looks like and modeling that in our daily lives. And I've seen this. Maybe you guys are familiar with the book series, The Power of the Praying, wife, Power of the Praying Husband, that sort of thing. And I know that's something that Beth, that's why I turned the camera so that you guys could see her. But that's but I know that's one of the things that maybe when I wasn't walking in step with God the way that she wished that I would, I know that's how she did it. She modeled it in our lives, and she prayed for me, and that's how we should be doing it. And she just pinched me. You can see it was outside the camera. But that's how we should be doing it for all those people in our lives. Look, if we have somebody that we think is not walking in step with God's will for their lives, we should pray for them, and we should model it in their lives, right? And I think that's what Jesus did in this. I think that's what we're called to do. All right. So let's go ahead and pray. We're a couple minutes over. I'll blame Travis. So we're good. All right, so let's go ahead and pray. Just thank you guys for all coming on here. Dear Lord, just thank you for this opportunity for us to be together, Lord. Thank you for keeping us safe, Lord, for those that are, in harm's way on a daily basis, Lord. I just ask that you'd protect them, Lord, that we'd find a prevention of this, Lord, that we'd contain this virus, Lord, that we'd be able to protect people, that be able to test them more readily and faster, Lord, just that we'd find a plan and a path to get us out of harm's way. Lord, but for eternity, I pray that this would open hearts and minds to what you've been promising us all along, which is your grace and your mercy, Lord. Just thank you for your son, Jesus, and thank you for little examples like we have here where we can learn what he was like as a child. Thank you for this group that we've been able to meet in spite of not being able to physically be together, even grow. Lord, just thank you so much for all that you continue to do in our lives. And then we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'll post this on YouTube here in a couple of days. So if you did anything embarrassing on camera, look for it.